Welcome to Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness, a podcast where we talk about the Constitution, politics, history, and pretty much anything else I want to talk about. This podcast can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music. I think if you tell Alexa to play Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness, she will. And if you want to see what we look like, come to YouTube, youtube.com, and then enter Annette Talks, and you can find us. And I always forget to mention my name. I'm Annette Bybee. I think I don't always mention it because I someday want to get married again and change that last name. So I just want people to think of me as Annette, like Oprah. So Annette Talks. I have a cousin or a niece that thought my last name was Talks for a while. I thought that was cute. Anyway, today we are joined by Nick Galletti. Hi, Nick.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Thank you for having me on.
You're welcome. So I think you and I met through mutual friends that had a podcast. And because I'm a podcaster, my friend said, you should talk to Nick because he's a podcast guy and you're like a sound engineer person. And you gave me some tips on sound, which I haven't followed yet because I still have this bare room that is echoey, but you know.
It's all right. I'm used to people not listening.
Well, let's hope that some people listen to this episode. Because we're not going to talk about sound production, but you have this project that is absolutely fascinating. And people that know me thought that I would be interested in it. And I can't remember if you reached out to me or someone else told me to, I don't know how this all started. But back in November, you and I made contact and you made me aware of what you were doing and the episodes that you recorded with this project. I keep calling it a project because that's what I think of it as.
It is. It is.
So I listened to those episodes and then we didn't talk for a while. And then recently you reached out again and you had made another episode and everything was live. And so I said, oh, cool. Okay. So he's like moving on this thing. It's real now. So tell us what this project is.
The project is called Freelance Legislator. And Freelance Legislator is an interesting concept. The title intrigued me when it first came to my mind. But basically what it is I am just an average citizen. I'm not particularly educated in political sciences, and I'm not disengaged with the political process. But I came to an understanding that I wanted to be involved in something political, in politics, but I wasn't sure that I wanted to run for office. That can be kind of a messy thing. I have done podcasting for a long time. And as you mentioned before, that's kind of how we met. So I tried to think of a concept for a show that would involve podcasting that would be political, but would not be what you already have out there, which is one side talking about one set of things and the other guy being the enemy, and one side talking about one set of things and the other guy being the enemy. And that's already out there. I just didn't want to add to that mess, that chaos. Mm-hmm. I wanted to see if there was a way to produce a show and a project, more than just a podcast, that would educate people on how to be actively engaged in the political process, but as a non-elected individual. But I also wanted to create a space for dialogue where people were able to engage in policy without talk of party. And that's kind of one of the things that we bring up on occasion in the show is, and I joke with some of the guests that we will have on, if people mention their political party, I beep them, like it's a swear word or something. And it's not that I think that there's anything inherently evil with parties, and I don't think that we need to abolish the system of parties. But I feel like as of right now, our current environment is such that it's really difficult to have conversations that are productive and effective without there being discord, disagreement, and really a power struggle. So Freelance Legislator is essentially a project where we are going to take an idea, whatever that idea may be, on whatever problem we may see in society, and I want to bring on guests, I want to bring on specialists, I want people to call in and give their opinions, but I want to take all of this information in. I want to formulate an actual policy and put it up on our website that a regular person can go to our website and say, I like this idea. I'm going to take this as my starting point to my legislator, to my city council member, to whoever that person is, and say, here's an idea I think we should try and push for. It's vetted. It's going to be nonpartisan, so it's not going to be heavily part of some power struggle. And my hope and my vision for this is that ultimately it grows and grows to where we have other people kind of acting as freelance legislators in their own states, and they tell us about what they're doing, and we can report on these different ideas that people generate. Obviously, we have some limitations on that, but that's basically the basic idea of the show, was to actually make policy, to actually make something that an average individual can say, this works, this makes sense to me. And we're giving you the steps on how to take it to your elected officials and make something of it.
All right. So that raised a lot of questions in my mind while we were talking. But one of the things that stood out to me is similar to what I did an episode last week on President Oak's talk on the Constitution, right? And when you mention how you don't want parties mentioned, or you don't want people to get into partisan discussions, it reminded me of something. This is what I said on my last episode, but I don't know if you can see that. But his basic point to me was,
yes,
if the Constitution is bigger than any party. And so I'm assuming that there's some, just from listening to the episodes that I've listened of yours, you had an intro episode, then you had one on how to read a bill or a law, and then how to write a bill or a law. And then you had on a gentleman that has already been involved as a citizen. I keep thinking the thought citizen legislator keeps going through my mind.
That works.
As sort of a citizen legislator, he's not an elected official. But from those episodes, I did gather that you do believe that our laws should be constitutional. So this is not like totally not nonpartisan, but it's not that there's no, what's the word I'm looking for here? It's not like you have no belief system that you think that these laws should sort of adhere to, right? There is some of that. It's just that you don't want to come at it from a partisan standpoint.
That's fair. Yeah, I certainly have a core set of beliefs, and I do have a political party. I won't say what it is again, because I don't want that to be filtering out audience or participation based on that. But I absolutely have a set of beliefs. Now, granted, those core beliefs are centered on and hopefully anchored in the Constitution, because I do believe that it has many wonderful things to it. I am of the mindset that with this show, we are focusing on cities, counties, and states more than federal, because as I interpret the Constitution, specifically the 10th Amendment, the federal government shouldn't have as much to do with our lives and everyday lives as it currently does. And so part of me wants to help people feel re-engaged in the idea that the real parts of a representative republic happen at the local levels, and levels where you can make a difference and have real communication with your elected officials. The people at the federal government level are so, understandably, but they're so disconnected from everyday life that it becomes incredibly inefficient to look to the federal government as the kind of solution provider for the way that we think our society should be run. And so in my mind, the Constitution itself helps to dictate the idea that we look to our cities, counties, and states first, instead of everything being federal. It makes sense. Most of the news organizations, they are speaking to a national audience, and so they have a kind of a built-in, we need to talk about national things. And because they're big and loud and everybody knows where to find them, it's very easy to get caught up in everything that needs to be done at the federal level. I'm just not of that brand, of that mindset. And so that's why the show is more geared towards what can you do in your area to affect the kind of change that you're looking to have. But again, it is principally centered.
Right. All right. Thank you. Well, that is the way the Constitution is established. I mean, that it sets up a system of federalism. So I'm glad that that's your focus, is that let's not try and worry about these big national issues. If we could get more people to be aware of the idea or the concept that things are happening at the local and state level, maybe it would help to get people more re-engaged and making federalism actually work. Right now, without naming parties or leaders or anything, we see a lot of stuff happening at the national level, but we see a lot of pushback from various governors saying, no, we're not going to enforce anything that you do that's unconstitutional coming from a national level. And so that's one way in which you're starting to see some of that federalism in action, is that we're not going to enforce stuff. So I think that's sort of an idea. It's like the 10th Amendment comes in and out of vogue. And right now it's coming back in vogue because a lot of people are thinking, hey, I don't like what's going on at the national level. So you're not even supposed to be doing that up there. So we're going to be doing something down here instead. So this is a really good time for your project to be.
I hope so.
Yeah. Well, I do too. You know, and it's funny because my undergrad is in political science, and I do have a law degree. And so it's kind of hard for me because it's a natural instinct to want to be involved in politics. But then when I start looking at laws, like I did when I was listening to your episode on reading a bill, and I went to the website that is linked in your website to look at that Utah bill.
Mm-hmm.
That was fascinating. I mean, it was fascinating that it was all there. And the fact that I have never done that. I mean, as a lawyer, when I was practicing, I'm not currently practicing, but when I would go and look up laws because I had to, right?
Right.
But to just go and do it out of curiosity to see how an issue is being pushed through the state assembly or the state house, I've never done that. And so that was pretty fascinating. And this is something that I think you talked about in your 4th episode, it can be pretty dry, pretty hard
sometimes
to look through this stuff. So I almost feel like for someone like me, even someone like me who's used to looking at law and used to reading law, we have to like really have an issue that we care passionately about and remember that that's why we're there doing it. We're not just going to look at a law like the one that you showed as an example. It was an interesting law about changing licensure for educators and basically making it so that people who've been involved in inappropriate relationships with people cannot have licensure. Anyway, that was a good law and everything, but it didn't speak to me like some other issues might speak to me.
Sure.
So I think if we can let people know, find something that really speaks to you and that you feel passionately about, and that will drive a lot of what you're doing as far as trying to make a change through writing a law. And it was interesting to me to see that in the case of the one that you showed us, she was actually making a change to a current law, but it was still called its own separate bill.
Yes.
And so that was fascinating to me too, because I never really thought about going in and, like making strike throughs or adding lines and things. But, from a personal standpoint, my podcast is highly partisan. Well, I would say it's not as much partisan as it is political. And so I do talk about my viewpoints on things. And so I have a lot of strong opinions on things, especially like what's going on with the COVID restrictions.
Yeah.
But if you were to come to me right now and say, what do you feel strongly about? It would be easy. And I think if you went on Facebook right now and said, what do people feel strongly about? It would be really easy to say, oh, well, I don't like mask mandates. And so that would be something that would be like, if I were going to pick a pet project, it might be to tell my state legislature. And actually listening to your episodes has kind of inspired me. And so I found out, I knew who these guys were because I'd looked them up before, but I emailed my state representative because he actually lives in my city. So he's someone that I could, drive over to his house theoretically and meet with sometime, ask him to be on my show. And so we'll see if I ever get a response, because I emailed him before about something and he never did. But to meet with my legislator and say, hey, what are you guys doing about these emergency orders that the governor is just, he's been, it's like we've been in an emergency for over a year now.
Right.
What are you guys doing to change that? And so, to me, it would say, if I could find a way to help them change that law that's already in place to say something like, the state legislature has got to approve any emergency measure that lasts longer than 30 days. Like, that's what I could get behind that. And you give me boring law all day long to rewrite, and I'll do it for that. If I think we're going to curtail our governor, from doing a lot of the stuff that he's been doing. So I think that, I guess I needed to make that leap in my mind as I was looking at that law. And I was like, gosh, it could be so boring, especially for people that are not lawyers, to look at some of this code and kind of get, ugh. But if I could see a law that I feel strongly about and say, and the governor must receive approval from X number of the legislature before renewing any emergency orders, then I am down with that. And I will do that all day long. So I think that's what people need to remember.
Well, and see, part of what I hope to have happen with the show, and of course, this is going to certainly be more approachable as the show gets longer in its life, is that there will be a pattern to the process of discovery and trying to learn more about the issue. Because one of the things that we'll see a lot on social media, on certain shows, it's, I've got an idea, and I just think, because I thought of it, it's a great idea. Yeah. And one of the things that I don't see happening a whole lot in social media, and perhaps the platform doesn't cater to this, is the idea that people can think about and develop an idea without a conclusion that comes right away. And so in this show, I hope to be able to show or be an example of, I've got an idea, and I think I've got an idea of what the solution is. But it's best to really take the time to understand many different sides to this issue before I formulate my idea, before I'm married to the solution. Because at some point you start to defend a solution because it's yours, not because it's a good one. And it could be, you could have come up with something great right out of the bat. But I have learned that it is a much more complicated process. There are so many moving parts to anything. And granted, I'm one that would love to see a more simplified government, because it becomes unapproachable. And I think that laws don't have to be written in such legalese all the time that it becomes really difficult to understand what they're talking about. So I am of the mindset with this that I do want to show that you can create laws and legislation that are simpler than they currently are, maybe not as dry. But I also want to get to the idea that there is a pattern and a process. And when you do find that thing that you're passionate about, because you're not going to be passionate about everything, that's really unrealistic. But if you find that thing that you're passionate about, that you at least see how to kind of rough up the idea, to test it, and to really see what a solution could look like, and one that helps understand the many different ways that people will come at it. And with our first series, we're starting off with a use of force registry. The idea was proposed with all of the, Black Lives Matters and police and all these kinds of things, that a use of force registry would be something that could be implemented, where we would have greater transparency as to what's really happening. Are the police really abusing their powers as much as some people claim they are? And where they are, maybe we should be concerned about that. And therefore, what do we do about it when that does come up? Because it happens. Police aren't perfect. They make mistakes and they do things wrong occasionally. But at the same time, there are narratives that seem to pull from certain experiences and perhaps maybe amplify them. But the reality is if we got down to real data, then maybe we would have something that we could all find actionable. Well, that's great on paper. And we have interviewed law enforcement individuals to find out how they view use of force registries, and come to find out some of them they don't have a really big problem with it. Part of it might be that they hope that it will vindicate them. I don't know what their motivation is, but
what is the use of force registry? Okay,
let's get into that. So the idea is that has been presented is that well, let me back up. The original idea was almost like a sex offender registry.
Okay.
If you had a police officer that was shown to be a repeat offender of some kind, that was particularly abusive of his authority, that there would be a national registry where no matter where he tried to get a job, people would know that that police officer had a history of whatever. As I thought about that more, I started to think, well, that I understand the merit, or what they're trying to get at. What the core of what they're trying to find is that we don't want to have these repeat offenders just move to another jurisdiction and keep abusing their power.
Mhm.
But I started to think about, what does that mean for the officer's family? What does that mean for other police officers? Would this registry essentially become a target? And these are some of the questions that I ask, simply to just beat up the idea, just to see how it would actually look. I actually had a manager at a job about 20 something years ago that used the phrase, when you're thinking about making a decision about something, fast forward to the end of the movie. How does it end? And so I've tried to really take that idea on. I'm fast forwarding through the idea. What will this look like if it happens? Then we started toying with the idea of, what if the registry was really just uses of force, where it was tracked like a statistic, and that essentially what that would do is that would give citizens the idea of what their local law enforcement is doing, how they respond to situations. I would imagine that if you were an individual that was very concerned about this matter, you could look up a police department's statistics and see where they are good at and where they're bad at when it comes to uses of force. And here's one of those ideas where the more I got into it, the more I was like, holy cow, this is really complicated. And one of the complications is that there is no standard on what constitutes a use of force. So come to find out, in some cases, if you simply handcuff an individual, that is considered a use of force. Why? Because you are essentially taking away their liberty. You are taking away, in some cases, their pursuit of happiness. I mean, I guess it depends on how you define that, but it is a use of force. Now, it's not a violent use of force most of the time, but it is a use of force. But not all police departments even track that. And you, on one level, you go, do we really need to track how many times someone handcuffs someone? Well, maybe. I don't know. That's the process, is that I want to look into it. I want to kind of ask the questions that it feels like maybe a lot of people aren't asking when it comes to these types of issues. And what does it mean when it's a use of force, when there's a warrant involved versus, a no-knock warrant, a regular warrant? If you are dealing with property issues versus, non-property related issues. And so there becomes this whole idea of, what do the police even capture? What statistics do they even capture, and what qualifies? And so the more I've gotten into this issue, the more I've gone, holy cow, for each state, there is no standard. There isn't. Every department can get it however they want. They can track their stats. They don't have to track stats. So the idea then became, well, with the use of force registry, do we need to standardize? Do we need to offer a standard as to what that is? And if so, where does that standard come from? You could go down a rabbit hole with this one, and I did. But one of the fun things about this, and why I think that it's a very engaging process, the more I've gotten into this, and again, I'm just starting out with this, but the more I've gotten into this, the more I realize how many different ways we, as it goes, you attack the leaves of the problem rather than the root. And so one of the things that has come up is, I found there's actually a law professor. She's an incredible legal mind, and she, I believe, is actually a dean. I could be wrong with that, with the University of Utah Law School. And she produced this paper that essentially asks the questions of, how effective are the police at doing their job? Now, I want to ask you, this is just return interview here. what do you think the job of the police are? What do you think the police are supposed to be doing?
That's a good idea, because you automatically think, of course, arresting criminals, keeping the peace.
Keeping the peace is a very broad idea, right?
It is. Because I'm thinking, all these little slogans are going through my mind: to protect and to serve. That's also very broad. And so, just from pulling you over and giving you a speeding ticket, that's like one of the big ones. But yeah, you think that they're there to arrest criminals, to put criminals behind bars.
But how do you know that they're a criminal?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, you have to have a warrant for their arrest, right? You have to have some kind of PC. This is stuff that we learn in law school. I'm going back to my criminal law class. And so, that's a really good question. Did her paper actually address that?
Absolutely. And we're going to be recording her later this week and having her on as an episode. And I tease it out because I feel like she asks a lot of questions that you go, wait, we've never really thought about that. Yeah. And like, when you say, what are the police supposed to do? You essentially, most people go, well, this is what they do, right? They pull people over and give them tickets and all these kinds of things. But what are they supposed to be doing? And therefore, what statistics are we gathering to see if they're actually doing it?
Yeah, law enforcement is the main thing that you think, they're supposed to be doing. But what does that mean? Right. Those are interesting questions about use of force. Because when you said handcuff, that means that their liberty is taken away. Well, as soon as you're arrested, your liberty is taken away, just not necessarily by force. So you have to make that distinction too. Once you're arrested, once you're under arrest, once you've been told you are under arrest, you're no longer free to go. Because they're all of that criminal law stuff's coming back to me now. Like, well, for one thing, as my libertarian attorney friend says every time he's on my podcast, if you're ever arrested, zip it and ask for an attorney, and that's it. Even if you've done nothing wrong, even if they're friendly to you and they just say they want your help, zip it and ask for an attorney. As soon as you know you're under arrest, and before you're under arrest, you're not obligated to answer questions either. But so yeah, but as soon as you're under arrest, you are no longer at liberty, right?
Well, and do you have to handcuff someone to arrest them?
No, you do not.
So, but see, that's why having a separate statistic for handcuffing is it might be a relevant question, because you may find that one particular officer handcuffs everybody. Right. And you got to wonder why that particular person uses that as their go-to, and is that necessary, and so on. And so I want to bring up the whole idea here of why we're going now. It feels like we started at one point of a use of force registry, and now we're going on what are police supposed to be doing? Because that is the path. That's when people typically engage on an issue, they will default, and I use that term very specifically, they will default to whoever their favorite pundit is. They will say, what does this person say about it? Yeah, that's my idea too. That's my thought too. And what I want people to be able to do is to just take a minute, just take a deep breath and say, you think a use of force registry is going to be the solution, but what's the real problem? Is the problem police abusing their power, beating people, choking people, whatever it is? Is that the real problem? Well, yeah, it is a problem, but is that why that they're doing it? What's the real core as to why that's happening? And is it really just happening to one group of people, and so on? And so when you start to ask the whys, some people, and I'm not trying to be judgmental here, but some people don't want to take the time to really get to the core. They're elected. They want to put a solution on the ballot so that they can say, look, I did something and get reelected. Well, I don't have to worry about getting reelected. For that matter, I don't have to worry about people listening to me. I'd love it if they wanted to. And obviously the more people that listened and agreed and we were able to work together to find solutions, great. But I'm not driven by that. I'm to have a better world and not about being reelected. So I have the time, I have the freedom to say, I'm going to go to the heart of this and ask the question, what are the police supposed to be doing? And are they really doing it? And so like one of the, you say you've been involved in criminal justice and some of those things. What do you think is the number one statistic that they use to prove or to make the argument that they are effective as a police department?
Oh, I'm sure it's arrests, number of arrests, number of tickets issued, number of, yeah, but I mean, because I had another guest on before who was a former police officer, and they had quotas. We always think that's a myth, but no, they had quotas, and if they did not make enough arrests, they were written up for not doing their job. So to me,
in Utah, by the way, that's illegal. You can't have quotas anymore.
And guess what? This guy was from Utah, so
it was only a year or two ago.
An unofficial thing. I think he left the force a few years back, so maybe it's changed since then. He wrote a book.
Oh, it has. It has.
Yeah, because to me, that's like the antithesis of what they should be doing. The goal isn't to put people behind bars. That shouldn't be it.
Right.
Unless they belong behind bars, but it shouldn't be out looking to find people to put behind bars. That to
right.
me should not be the goal. But getting pulling back again from this goal, I mean, from this topic. So you're saying that this is a use of force registry was somebody's idea as far as wanting to pass a law. And so this was something that you've been researching. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I want to look again at the mechanics of your project and how
sure.
it's all going to work, because I'm trying to picture like the end result here, or, you know, further down the line when I come to your website and what I'm going to find. Right now I find 4 episodes that teach us how to, is there 5? See, did I miss one? Did I miss a use of force episode?
Nope, you're good.
Okay, because I only saw 4. There was the intro, there was read a law, write a law, and then the
citizen legislator one. And
yes.
Then we started on our intro episode to this use of force registry.
Okay, I don't know how I missed use of force because I remember reading it somewhere and then I didn't see it again.
Okay.
Anyway, I'm gonna have to go back and listen. But okay, so you've got these episodes on there, and let's just say then I don't know, 6 months down the line, I come and I find your website. What will I find? Will I find people talking about laws that they want to pass? Will I find a law or a bill in progress that someone's working on and that people are commenting on it or lining through it? Like, will I find a community of people discussing a law that someone's trying to write? What does it look like?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking that question. And big picture, that's correct. We hope to have a situation where, like, along the process here, just using this use of force one, when we get to a point in our research and development of it that we go, we've got an idea here, we feel it's researched and we understand it, then we will draft the writing of what we think would be proposed legislation. We'll put it up on the website and we'll have a period of time where people can comment on it and give their feedback. All along the way, we also have a phone number where people can call in and leave their voicemail, essentially, but their thoughts on a particular line, a bill, matter of the issue, whatever it is. And so my hope is that we are taking in all of these comments and understanding that's a good idea. That's a good idea. That idea stinks on ice. That one, you know, some of them are just going to be, you know, people complaining and not really offering a solution. And in most of those cases, it will probably largely be ineffectual, because if you're not offering a solution, I don't know what to do with what you're saying. Mm-hmm. So at this point, the goal would be to put this bill up, have it chewed up and spit out by different people's opinions, and then we will hone it in such a way that we will then put it on our repository on our site, where people can go and they can download like a PDF or something of our proposed version. Now, understanding that every state, every city, every county is going to have to massage the language a little bit, because everybody has a slightly different code. And for that matter, most states try and keep the language fairly consistent within the rest of the state. So there's going to be some things that will get massaged in the process. But of course, any of these things are still subject to the actual laws, the process of legislators proposing it to the elected officials, and then they get it, passed or not. So
That's what
what
I'm
we
wondering
hope,
is you take it to, then you take this bill that's been torn up by people commenting on it, and you've gone over it several times, and then you take it to your local state senator or state rep or city council person and say, this is what I want to do, and then you
yeah,
work with them on it.
yeah.
Is that the goal?
And so the intent is, if we were able to put something together that's, I don't want to call it bulletproof, because no legislation is, I think, 100% set in stone.
No, especially
Language.
you get more than one lawyer in a room.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I guarantee you,
Yeah.
that thing gets marked up. So
Yeah.
that was one of the frustrating things about me about going to bar association meetings, is sitting around a table while everyone goes over the most recent version of, because I was in wills and trusts. And so they would go over the new version, because we have like templates that we use here in Colorado that are Colorado bar approved. Right. And then so most people use them. Most wills and trust attorneys use them. I have this huge orange binder. And so whenever they need to be updated, there's this group that goes around and lines through these templates and puts little notes on the side. And then someone else says, you know what? No, it's wrong for this reason. But I mean, at least these are people who are in that field, and they know why it will work or won't work. But those suckers will get lined and lined and lined again and again before they're finally completed and it's by a committee. And so it sounds like you're going to have your own committee basically on your website of whoever wants to come in and jump in and make comments about it.
Ultimately, that's part of, I mean, I don't know if we want to call it a committee. The listeners to the podcast are more like constituents, virtual constituents. And so we hope to be able to kind of take all that in to understand where people's feelings are on it. But again, the hope is that when we hand something over, that we want the word to be vetted. We want it to be something that has been thought through, and that we have some understanding. And for that matter, we want the process to be fairly public, right? We're hoping that it's done on the podcast so that people can hear how we came to where we came to. That's a window into lawmaking that very few people get. And if it would be a really cool benefit for the show, not the goal, but a really cool benefit, if our politicians, our elected officials, were more transparent with their meetings. I mean, if they met with a lobbyist, if they met with whoever that had an opinion on something, record it, put it out there. I mean, maybe not everything could be made public, because certainly there's certain issues that have privacy concerns related to them. But I would love to see a little bit more transparency with the process, because one of the things that I find that we are lacking, severely lacking in our society, is the patience and the maturity to listen to someone else's experience and maybe let them inform our own, or maybe just understand where they're coming from. And it doesn't mean that we have to bend over just because someone has a really emotional plea or whatever it is, but it doesn't hurt to understand where they're coming from. And like I said, one of the things that we're hoping to do, at least with this use of Force Registry, is to say, we need to stop. We are not asking the right questions. So we're going to take this side jaunt, because it's really important to get to where we want to go, not to the solution we want to get to, but to a solution. And if we can have the maturity to sit through that process a little bit, we might actually find that we could come together with a system of defining what police are supposed to be doing and tracking how well they're doing it in a way that people can find empowering. And part of the reason I bring that one up is because ultimately we want the police to solve crimes, right? I mean, if we've delegated that power as citizens to the police force to help solve crimes that have happened, to make us, to facilitate the process of making us whole for the crimes that were committed against us, that's really what we need to track. If we say how many people were arrested, well, that's fine, but we don't know how many crimes were committed versus how many people were arrested. And so if you're like, hey, 99% of the people we arrested were convicted, well, that's great if you're really getting everybody that was guilty of every crime that was reported. and so on and so forth. So ultimately, if we're not capturing the right data, we might find ourselves sitting back and resting on really bad information. And from there, we're going to have the problem that I feel that we have right now. And that is that the police officers are seen as the customer service representatives of the legislature. And so if you have a problem with a certain law, well, you're going to take it out on the customer service guy. You're not going to go to corporate office and talk to that guy. You're going to talk to the guy that's enforcing it and running that policy in front of you. You know, the guy at the returns counter takes all the flack for the return policy, but he didn't make it.
Right.
And so ultimately, I mean, I don't mean that to demean the police or anything, but we have to wonder if, as law enforcers, they're not found guilty of enforcing really crummy laws.
Yeah.
And so they're the bad guys when maybe they're not the bad guys. So that's kind of the mindset that we're going through. And I've got a really cool idea that I want to share with you on an upcoming series. So before we're done, I want to tease that out if I could.
All right. So what comes to mind as you're talking about the concept of this use of force registry and trying to figure out what you want to report and that kind of thing, what would be great is if you could get some police officers, maybe anonymously, to weigh in on what they would like to see, what they see as the internal problem within the force, within just policing in general, because that would be really interesting to hear.
We did. And that first episode that you haven't heard yet was an interview with, it's there. That is an interview with I don't know what constitutes a veteran of the police force, but he's been over 10 years and is on various task forces now and things like that. So he's kind of had different levels of experience, and we get his opinion on use of force stuff. And honestly, I don't know if people will get this impression when listening to the episode, but I left the episode with more questions than answers. And that's probably good, because we are exploring, we're trying to understand the issue more. And that's, again, part of the process. I want to be able to find that out. So talking to police officers, in this case, I want to even talk to a records clerk, the person that has to track this stuff for the police department. And I want to also talk to anybody that has a valid experience with this issue. But again, as I've gone through this process, I've really come to the understanding I need to know what police are supposed to do. Because if they're supposed to come down my street and make sure my car wasn't parked on the street during a snow day and give me a ticket, really, who's the victim there?
Yeah.
And so at some point I have to, ask the question, why do I have a $38 fine for this? Where did $38 come from? Did I do $38 worth of damage? Certain questions that I want to ask and see if there's even an answer. And if there's not an answer, then I almost want to say, well, then maybe we should ask the police to stop doing that.
Yeah.
Because they already have 1,000 things that they're doing. Maybe they have too much on their plate. You know what I mean? So that's where we're coming from. And I use that as an example because we're going to come to lots of other ideas. We're going to try out all sorts of different things. And I really want us to have kind of an awakening of trying to come to the cores of why we're doing what we're doing. At this point, I don't know about you, but it feels like our society is kind of in that position, like with a senior citizen or someone, where they go to their doctor and the doctor says, oh, you have this symptom, I'm going to give you this pill, but it's going to cause this side effect, so I'm going to give you another pill. And ultimately, this person ends up being on 10 to 15 different medications to solve one little thing. And it feels like our society has kind of gotten to that point. It's so complicated where we're band-aiding and we're medicating symptoms of symptoms, and it becomes too much for people to manage. And that's why I think ultimately we see people fighting back in the ways that they do, because is the problem really as widespread as it really is? No, but if you have 50 different things that are crowding your psyche and making you feel virtually oppressed, you're going to fight back. It's natural for people to want liberty. They want that life. They want to pursue their happiness. But if ultimately we are micromanaging the law so much that it becomes so hard to even know what it means to be a citizen, that people are going to feel oppressed on a daily basis, even if they're not with a police officer at their door. So that's kind of the extreme version, but that's where my mind is. And that's where I'm kind of hoping that, again, my grand vision of it is that we can find a way to get to the core of these things so we can simplify what it means to be a citizen, what it means to be a law enforcement officer, and so on.
Interesting. Well, that definitely is a very, very big topic, and creating a registry is a really, really big deal. So I'm glad that you're spending quite a bit of time researching and thinking, and because I think part of the problem with legislatures, a lot of times you alluded to earlier, is that they want to be seen as doing something, and so they do things and they pass things probably more quickly and without as much research and thought and input as they should be. And then what you end up with is these laws that really tick people off because they're being affected by these laws that were put into place, often as a result of trying to fix a problem that the government created in the first place. And that's what's most irritating, is we see the government create a problem in some way and then say, oh, we're going to come and fix that for you, and we're going to pass this law quickly so we can be seen as doing something for you. Well, if we take the legislature out of the equation here, maybe at least as you're crafting a law and looking at the reasons behind it and how to come at it, maybe we can make a big change.
Well, it's an educational process. Whatever the solution is at the other end, you get a great education on the way there.
Yes, you do.
And that's part of it. I feel like right now we have an undereducated populace on how some of these things go. And what that ends up with is a group of people that thinks that, number one, the solution is to take away someone's right.
Mm-hmm.
And for that matter, the only way for me to have my right is to take away one of yours. And so the idea of competing rights just gets so messy. And I think that might be part of why people are fighting about certain social issues. It's for the same reason, is they eventually come to a point where they're like, I'm feeling oppressed, and therefore the only way that I can get what I want is to oppress my oppressors. And then it just becomes this battle where nobody's feeling like they have a life or liberty, or they can pursue their happiness because they're so consumed with keeping other people from impacting their life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, that it just becomes a very segmented group of people that feel oppressed for one reason or another. And then everybody's unhappy. Everybody looks at, look at the Congress's approval rating. I mean, what other business would you be okay with a single digit or maybe even low double digit approval rating? And would you stay on Netflix if 10% of you only were able to watch videos 10% of the time? No, you dump it. But for some reason we are reelecting these people, and there again, I'm not trying to get too deep into this, but you have to ask yourself the questions: why are we reelecting them? Why are people seeing these people as the fixers of the problem when we don't like anything that they're doing? But most people aren't educated enough to know how or why things are the way they are. And therefore, if we can get to the heart of that, perhaps we'll be able to get to the heart of real solutions.
Yep. Defense. I feel like a lot of us are living our lives in a defensive mode and divided. So it feels like Washington and local governments are keeping us under their thumb by keeping us on the defensive and divided. And so we need to hop out of that whole narrative, that whole mindset, and say, no, I'm not going to buy into that. And so I think one of the ways that we can do that is by doing things that we feel like are making a difference. So I like the fact that your project is a positive one. It's not a defensive one. It's an offensive one. We're going to go after things. We're going to try and solve problems. Now, my libertarian friend again would say creating laws never makes a change, or is never helpful. But I like the idea of maybe getting rid of some laws. And so that would be one thing, is that you take a current law and you say, how much can we line through of this puppy? So there's no reason why you can't approach it from that aspect as well.
Right. And that's one of the things that I kind of learned through this process too, because I came to realize when we talk about a law, most people don't really even know what that looks like, but there's a book of code that governs the actions of our government. And so when you pass a bill or when you propose a bill, all you're doing is you're proposing an addition or subtraction to that code. That's it. You don't need to complicate it any more than that. You're either adding to or you're subtracting from the code. So you can write a bill that just cuts out parts of the code,
Mhm.
not necessarily adds to it. You can certainly take away. And in some cases, that is the solution. I know some people go, oh, that sounds like chaos or anarchy. Not at all. It's freedom. It's the idea that people can govern themselves to a certain extent. Obviously, I mean, there is a need for law enforcement,
Mhm.
but to what extent there are laws can be something that we analyze and we determine whether or not there's a real need for it. And again, when people propose solutions, sometimes after it goes through a legislature, it comes back so complicated that you're like, you know what, this is a bad idea now. It wasn't, but you guys have beat this thing up that it's become a bad idea. And at least in Utah, one of the nice things that we have is a single subject rule, that every bill can only be one thing. You can't Christmas tree things like the federal government does and says, oh, that looks like that's got legs, I'm going to put my idea on that. And stuff like that seems so rational. It seems so logical. One bill, one idea. Don't complicate it.
Yeah.
But even that isn't happening everywhere. And so maybe what we talk about is, one of the laws that I'm wanting to propose in the future is X number of pages. We need X number of days before a law can be voted on.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to write this 2,500 page Obamacare bill and expect everybody to understand it, process it in a week,
Yeah. It's not,
that should be against the rules. It should be against the rules of procedure, regardless of your opinion of Obamacare. Procedurally, that's a horrible idea. That is really bad legislation. And so my thought is, if you're going to have this many pages of bill, it's going to require X number of days before people can vote on it, because we need a chance to read it, appreciate what's in it, to understand the impacts of it, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
That's an idea. That's another one we want to chew out, on the show, and kind of discuss what the implications are of that and see how people respond to it.
Yeah, I like it. So your website is free. I don't think I ever threw it out there, but it's freelancelegislator.com, right?
Right.
And so now tell us, what is this idea that you have that you wanted to
Okay. This beautiful idea, and in some ways it's going to be revolutionary, which is part of the fun of this. And it may feel a little like we're playing in a sandbox, and that's part of the fun. We get to explore things that elected officials are too scared to explore, understandably, maybe. So I came across an idea that a city council member in a town in Minnesota had. And that was, because this was correlating to an idea that I had, was that my idea was, if you were in a city or a county or a state, and you're a taxpayer, that every year during election season or whenever, that you would be given a certain number of credits. Okay. And let's say you're given 100, just for the sake of ease. And you were then given a menu of all the services that the city provides: police, fire, parks, whatever it is that your city provides. And you determine how much of your tax credits go towards that program. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So if you see a list of 200 things and you only have 100 credits, something is not getting funded.
Right.
Or if it's, a lower list or whatever, you get to essentially use these credits as your vote, as your priority, as a citizen of, this is the most important thing to me. This little thing down here at the bottom, first of all, I didn't even know you guys were doing that. Let's not fund that, because I don't think we should be funding that.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially, your credit would be your vote on what the city is doing, where you think your tax dollars should go. But it was still essentially a vote. It was still me registering my opinion. Well, this city council member up in Minnesota said, no, we want it to count. We want every citizen to say, you're paying, let's just say $500. I don't know what it would be for every city. You're paying $500 in taxes. How much of your $500 goes to police, to this, to that? And they have to do it. They have to put your money where you tell them it's going into. It's not a vote. It is mandate. Now, how different would your city look if you were that intricately involved in where your actual tax dollars went. The question then becomes, well, what if nobody funds this? Well, then nobody wanted it.
Mm-hmm.
Supply and demand.
Mm-hmm.
If nobody wants that service, they're not going to fund it. How different would your city look if your city way? Would it look more like the city you want? And when you ask that question, people have to think about it. Well, in my talking with this city council member and trying to understand how she approaches doing city council stuff, she had all sorts of other great ideas that I was like, wow, that's a great idea. Like, but I would want to still explore it. Like they said, they were thinking of changing the city code that if anybody planted a tree on a city park or a street that was maintained by the city, that it was fruit bearing and that anybody in the city could eat the fruit off of it. So if every tree in your city had fruit off of it and anybody could come and eat it, why not? What would be the problem there? And, you know, the thought entered my mind of, well, you probably either A, increase your homeless population, or you might even decrease it. You might even find that some people will, you know, if they come and pick them and sell them, okay, there must be a market for that. I don't know. But these questions become very interesting because I never thought about that before. And I want to be able to explore those things. And I'm not saying 100% that that's a great idea. I'm just saying I want to ask those questions. Well, again, in talking with this person, one of the other ideas that she said was that there's another town in Minnesota. I don't know what's going on with Minnesota, but this other town in Minnesota, they got together and they decided, we want to scrap our entire city code and start over. We want to write it where people can understand it. We want to only put in things that the people really want now. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can't even fathom the idea of what that would look like for a city to just start over from scratch. That Renaissance feeling would be incredible to see what would come out and how much fluff was just cast aside as that doesn't matter anymore, or we don't find that to be important. And so these are the things that I'm discovering as I'm doing this process and just trying to find new ideas and just explore what that would look like. And it's so exciting to me. It's why I'm doing it, because ultimately I feel like it's educating me as a citizen on what could be done, that could be fun, that could be, fun's not a great standard, but they could be engaging and meaningful and powerful. And we get to play in that sandbox and propose ideas that we've really thought about, some of which might be as crazy as scraping a whole city code, and some of it might be as simple as one line of code. But who knows how that one line of code might help someone feel so much better about owning their property. Like right now in my city, one of the things that I care about is I'm trying to be water wise. I don't want to spend a whole lot of money in water. I don't want to be wasteful and those sorts of things. I'd rather just be more self-sufficient. And so we've eliminated our lawn and we've put in wood chips and rocks and things that it's called xeriscaping is the term. And we thought, oh, this would be really great. We're not going to have a huge water bill or anything like that. We could still make it look really nice. Well, then come knocking on our door, the code enforcement officer says, your yard is no longer to code. I don't understand why there's a problem with this. I'm trying not to waste resources. What's the problem? And they said, you need to have at least 20% living or living or organic plant life in your yard. And I said, 20%? Where did 20% come from? Why do you even care? Like, what difference does it make to anybody?
A city thing or an HOA thing? Or
it's a city thing. I'm not in an HOA. And so I came to, ask this law enforcement officer, why is this? Again, stupid. Why am I talking to the law enforcement officer about it? He didn't make the policy. He's just there to say, this is the policy and you're not in compliance. But the question started coming into my mind. who made that law? It's in the law. Someone put it there. Why did they put it there?
Mhm.
And why do they care whether or not I have grass in my front yard?
Mhm.
But there again, there are these things that we'll encounter and we'll kind of bash up against them, and we'll have to ask ourselves, why did someone rest on 20%?
Yeah.
Where did that come from? Why is and how do you even measure that? Like, is it by square footage? I don't understand what count. I had trees and bushes. Why didn't those count? Like, was it that the actual grass wasn't there? So the questions became, I don't know, you have to talk to the city officers about it. Okay, well, I'll go talk to the city officers about it, because
Mhm.
that doesn't make any sense to me.
Mhm.
And I don't know that I want an enforcement officer going around spending his time trying to police my yard with something like, you need to have 20%
Yeah, they're gonna
living material.
come out with a ruler,
Yeah.
tape
And
measure.
then what are you going to fine me for? What is that going to accomplish?
Yeah.
Am I going to have to go out and get, 2 square feet worth of grass and just plant that on my yard awkwardly and uselessly just to make someone happy randomly? I mean, it
That
seems
sounds
really
like
strange.
the same thing that I thought when you were talking about the police officer ticketing you for parking on one side of the street, revenue generation. And that's the only thing I can think of,
Right.
just revenue generation.
Well, we also think that optics are very high value, right? If our homes look good, if our neighborhoods look good, then our values go up. Maybe crime goes down because we're not getting the dregs of society. I don't know what the thinking is.
Right.
But if you don't have grass, that's going to look barren and horrible. And we don't want that in our city. Well, I don't care. You know, I'm trying to save you water. What do you care? Why is this a problem for you? So ultimately, those are the kinds of things that I think will come up. You ask about our vision of things. I have a feeling people will eventually say, this is a problem in my city. And then we'll go, great. I understand that it's a problem in a lot of cities. Let's figure out why that happened. And maybe all it is we eliminate those types of things. I'm right now, I'm trying to build a studio off the back of my house that will work as my office. As you said, I'm a sound engineer by trade, but my day job is in an office. I do office work. My office work involves audio. So I want a separate place so that my kids who jump up and down upstairs and make noise in my recordings and distract things, or, when an air conditioner blares on, it doesn't come into my recordings and those sorts of things. I want a separate space for that.
Mm-hmm.
It's on my property. I don't understand why there would be a problem, but there's a code issue where they're not allowing me to build it the way that I want it. And I said, what's the problem? I don't understand. Well, they give me this laundry list of, we allow this, and we don't allow this, and this, and this. Well, why? I'm just going to have an office. I'm not, running a restaurant out of there. It's, what's the big deal? And it got down to rules like, I wanted to put a shower out there. I've got 5 daughters and my wife. We've got 2 showers. Some days I would like a third shower that I can go use on my own, right? It's a little crowded in there. So I wanted to, if I'm going to build the studio out there, I want to have my own bathroom and I want a shower. What difference does it make to anybody? Well, if there's a shower, it's a residence. And so if it's a residence, then I can't do it because our zoning doesn't allow for a second residence. I'm like, look, there's no kitchen. There's, people can't live there, but someone determined that a shower constituted as a residence. So therefore it wasn't allowed. And there's a part of me that goes, well, it's my property. I don't care what you allow. It's my property. And if I'm not injuring someone, where's the victim? And so these questions are things that other people have asked, but they may not have thought into what a solution would really look like. And so that's this show. Tell us what your problems are. And we're a freelance legislator. We'd love to hear what those problems are. And we'd love to chew up an idea and see what comes out the other side. And maybe we have something good. Maybe your idea is terrible, and we'll tell you why it's principally in conflict with the Constitution and why we can't get back to you on that because we don't support something. It could be that way. We could upset people. It's still possible. We're not just going to take anything that people throw at us. But again, the idea is hopefully that we're generating something that will capture people's interest, their attention, and that ultimately we can create legislation that doesn't have to strip away anything from anybody to accomplish what we want to see happen in our cities, counties, and states.
All right. So it's freelancelegislator.com.
.com.
And that's where you're going to have the episodes where you're going to be talking about the things that are going on the website as far as what laws or bills you guys are throwing around, what ideas you're researching to make into bills and that kind of thing.
Exactly.
We're going to interact.
I hope so. If we're doing our job, we really want people to be able to interact. And if they don't, we get it. But I think it makes the process a little bit better when they do.
Awesome. Well, I just have to say one comment about that city that wants to throw or scrap.
Yeah.
The lawyer in me was like, whoa. People count on those laws being on the books that they have been adhering to. You know what I mean? Like, you can't just scrap stuff all of a sudden. Got to replace it with something so that people have something to count on that they know. It's called rule of law for a reason, so it's not just chaos. Anyway.
Well, they're certainly not ditching. They when they did this, and by the way, they did do this. And I'm not going to tell you which city. You have to tune in to listen. The city did it. And in fact, the reason that this second city was jumping on the idea was because this city council member said, here's their code. Look at it and see what they came up with. And the city manager for the second city said, we're doing this. It was so convincing that they said, the idea sounded ludicrous, but after looking at it said, we're doing this.
Well,
So,
if the city code is much simpler, much more streamlined, and gives people more freedom, then I would be all for it too. We are going to end it on that note. So I hope that if you're listening, that you've given some thought now to the idea of perhaps becoming a part of the solution and diving into the freelancelegislator.com website, listening to the first episodes. I've got one to go back and listen to. Apparently I missed it somehow. And start thinking along the lines of what you can do as a citizen to change a law, help create a law, and come up with something that we can later take to your legislator.
yeah.
So thanks, Nick, for coming on.
Thank you.
I love the idea of taking stuff that we not just talking about it all the time on podcasts and not just griping about them all the time on social media, but actually doing something about it.
That's it.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening to Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness, where freedom lovers gather.